Good evening, and thank you for joining me for another Boring Books for Bedtime. I hope tonight's selection provides all the boredom your busy brain needs to quiet down and let you get some sleep. Before we begin, I'd like to give a special shout out of thanks to two new members of our Patreon family, Michael and Mitch. Thank you both so much for supporting this podcast. By becoming members of Patreon, you help us cover the costs of recording, production, and distribution so that we can keep making new episodes ad-free every week, and it's very much appreciated. If you'd like to learn about the perks available to Patreon subscribers, including exclusive episodes heard nowhere else, you'll find a link to Patreon in the show description. You'll also find a link to buymeacoffee.com, where you can support us with a one-time tip, no subscription required. I hope you'll take a moment to check them out. Now, let's read and relax. Find a comfortable spot. Adjust your volume. Take a nice deep breath in. Let it out slowly. And off we go. Tonight we continue on an historic journey into the East with the Travels of Marco Polo, the complete Yule Cordier edition, including the unabridged third edition of Henry Yule's annotated translation, as revised by Henri Cordier in 1903. Together with Cordier's later volume of Notes and Addenda, 1920. Let's continue our journey where we left off. Chapter 5 of the Kingdom of Mosul. On the frontier of Armenia towards the southeast is the Kingdom of Mosul. It is a very great kingdom, and inhabited by several different kinds of people, whom we shall now describe. First, there is a kind of people called Arabi, and these worship Muhammad. Then there is another description of people who are Nestorian and Jacobite Christians. These have a patriarch, whom they call the Jatolic, and this patriarch creates archbishops and abbots and prelates of all other degrees, and sends them into every quarter, as to India, to Balazs, or to Cathay, just as the Pope of Rome does in the Latin countries. For you must know that though there is a very great number of Christians in those countries, they are all Jacobites and Nestorians, Christians indeed, but not in the fashion enjoined by the Pope of Rome, for they come short in several points of the faith. All the cloths of gold and silk that are called muslins are made in this country, and those great merchants called muslins, who carry for sale such quantities of spicery and pearls and cloths of silk and gold, are also from this kingdom. There is yet another race of people who inhabit the mountains in that quarter, and are called Kurds. Some of them are Christians, and some of them are Saracens, but they are a bad generation, whose delight it is to plunder merchants. Near this province is another called Mus and Murdan, producing an immense quantity of cotton, from which they make a great deal of buckram and other cloth. The people are craftsmen and traders, and all are subject to the Tartar king. Chapter 6 of the great city of Balazs and how it was taken. Balazs is a great city, which used to be the seat of the Caliph of all the Saracens in the world, just as Rome is the seat of the Pope of all the Christians. A very great river flows through the city, and by this you can descend to the Sea of India. There is a great traffic of merchants with their goods this way. They descend some 18 days from Balazs, and then come to a certain city called Kisi, where they enter the Sea of India. There is also on the river, as you go from Balazs to Kisi, a great city called Bastra, surrounded by woods, in which grow the best dates in the world. In Balazs they weave many different kinds of silk stuffs and gold brocades, such as nasich and nak and cramoisi, and many another beautiful tissue richly wrought with figures of beasts and birds. It is the noblest and greatest city in all those regions. Now it came to pass on a day in the year of Christ 1255 that the lord of the Tartars of the Levant, whose name was Alau, brother to the great Khan now reigning, gathered a mighty host, and came up against Balazs and took it by storm. It was a great enterprise, for in Balazs there were more than 100,000 horse, besides foot soldiers. And when Alau had taken the place, he found therein a tower of the caliphs, which was full of gold and silver and other treasure. In fact, the greatest accumulation of treasure in one spot that was ever known. When he beheld that great heap of treasure, he was astonished, and summoning the Caliph to his presence, he said to him, "Caliph, tell me now why thou hast gathered such a huge treasure. What didst thou mean to do therewith? Knewest thou not that I was thine enemy, and that I was coming against thee with so great a host, to cast thee forth of thine heritage? Wherefore didst thou not take of thy gear, and employ it in paying knights and soldiers, to defend thee and thy city?" The Caliph wist not what to answer, and said never a word. So the prince continued, "Now then, Caliph, since I see what a love thou hast borne thy treasure, I will even give it thee to eat." So he shut the Caliph up in the treasure tower, and bade that neither meat nor drink should be given him, saying, "Now, Caliph, eat of thy treasure as much as thou wilt, since thou art so fond of it, for never shalt thou have aught else to eat." So the Caliph lingered in the tower 4 days, and then died like a dog. Truly, his treasure would have been of more service to him had he bestowed it upon men who would have defended his kingdom and his people, rather than let himself be taken and deposed and put to death as he was. Howbeit, since that time, there has never been another Caliph, either at Balazs or anywhere else. Now I will tell you of a great miracle that befell at Balazs, wrought by God on behalf of the Christians. Chapter 7. How the Caliph of Balazs took counsel to slay all the Christians in his land. I will tell you then this great marvel that occurred between Balazs and Mosul. It was in the year of Christ 1255 that there was a Caliph at Balazs who bore a great hatred to Christians, and was taken up day and night with the thought how he might either bring those that were in his kingdom over to his own faith, or might procure them all to be slain. And he used daily to take counsel about this with the devotees and priests of his faith, for they all bore the Christians like malice. Now it happened that the Caliph, with those shrewd priests of his, got hold of that passage in our gospel which says that if a Christian had faith as a grain of mustard seed, and should bid a mountain to be removed, it would be removed. And such indeed is the truth. But when they had got hold of this text, they were delighted, for it seemed to them the very thing whereby either to force all the Christians to change their faith, or to bring destruction upon them all. The Caliph therefore called together all the Christians in his territories, who were extremely numerous. And when they had come before him, he showed them the gospel, and made them read the text which I have mentioned. And when they had read it, he asked them if that was the truth. The Christians answered that it assuredly was so. Well, said the Caliph, since you say that it is the truth, I will give you a choice. Among such a number of you, there must needs surely be this small amount of faith. So you must either move that mountain there, and he pointed to a mountain in the neighborhood, or you shall die an ill death, unless you choose to eschew death by all becoming Saracens and adopting our holy law. To this end I give you a respite of 10 days. If the thing be not done by that time, ye shall die or become Saracens. And when he had said this, he dismissed them to consider what was to be done in this strait wherein they were. Chapter 8. How the Christians were in great dismay because of what the Caliph had said. The Christians, on hearing what the Caliph had said, were in great dismay, but they lifted all their hopes to God, their Creator, that He would help them in this their strait. All the wisest of the Christians took counsel together, and among them were a number of bishops and priests. But they had no resource except to turn to him, from whom all good things do come, beseeching him to protect them from the cruel hands of the Caliph. So they were all gathered together in prayer, both men and women, for 8 days and 8 nights. And whilst they were thus engaged in prayer, it was revealed in a vision by a holy angel of heaven to a certain bishop who was a very good Christian, that he should desire a certain Christian cobbler who had but one eye to pray to God, and that God in his goodness would grant such prayer because of the cobbler's holy life. Now I must tell you what manner of man this cobbler was. He was one who led a life of great uprightness and chastity, and who fasted and kept from all sin, and went daily to church to hear Mass, and gave daily a portion of his gains to God. And the way how he came to have but one eye was this. It happened one day that a certain woman came to him to have a pair of shoes made, and she showed him her foot that he might take her measure. Now she had a very beautiful foot and leg, and the cobbler in taking her measure was conscious of sinful thoughts, and he had often heard it said in the Holy Evangel that if thine eye offend thee, pluck it out and cast it from thee, rather than sin. So as soon as the woman had departed, he took the awl that he used in stitching, and drove it into his eye and destroyed it, and this is the way he came to lose his eye. So you can judge what a holy, just, and righteous man he was. Chapter 9. How the one-eyed cobbler was desired to pray for the Christians. Now, when this vision had visited the bishop several times, he related the whole matter to the Christians, and they agreed with one consent to call the cobbler before them. And when he had come, they told him it was their wish that he should pray, and that God had promised to accomplish the matter by his means. On hearing their request, he made many excuses, declaring that he was not at all so good a man as they represented. But they persisted in their request with so much sweetness that at last he said he would not tarry, but do what they desired. Chapter 10. How the prayer of the one-eyed cobbler caused the mountain to move. And when the appointed day was come, all the Christians got up early, men and women, small and great, more than 100,000 persons, and went to church and heard the Holy Mass. And after Mass had been sung, they all went forth together in a great procession to the plain in front of the mountain, carrying the precious cross before them, loudly singing and greatly weeping as they went. And when they arrived at the spot, there they found the Caliph with all his Saracen host, armed to slay them if they would not change their faith. For the Saracens believed not in the least that God would grant such favor to the Christians. These latter stood indeed in great fear and doubt, but nevertheless they rested their hope on their God. So the cobbler received the bishop's benison, and then threw himself on his knees before the Holy Cross, and stretched out his hands toward heaven, and made this prayer. Blessed Lord God Almighty, I pray thee by thy goodness that thou wilt grant this grace unto thy people, insomuch that they perish not, nor thy faith be cast down, nor abused, nor flouted. Not that I am in the least worthy to prefer such request unto thee, but for thy great power and mercy, I beseech thee to hear this prayer from me, thy servant full of sin. And when he had ended this his prayer to God, the sovereign Father and giver of all grace, and whilst the Caliph and all the Saracens and other people there were looking on, the mountain rose out of its place and moved to the spot which the Caliph had pointed out. And when the Caliph and all his Saracens beheld, they stood amazed at the wonderful miracle that God had wrought for the Christians, insomuch that a great number of the Saracens became Christians. And even the Caliph caused himself to be baptized in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen, and became a Christian, but in secret. Howbeit, when he died, they found a little cross hung round his neck, and therefore the Saracens would not bury him with the other caliphs, but put him in a place apart. The Christians exulted greatly at this most holy miracle, and returned to their homes full of joy, giving thanks to their Creator for that which he had done. Now I have told you something of Balazs. I could easily indeed have told you first of the affairs and the customs of the people there, but it would be too long a business. looking to the great and strange things that I have got to tell you, as you will find detailed in this book. So now I will tell you of the noble city of Taurus. Chapter 11 of the noble city of Taurus. Taurus is a great and noble city, situated in a great province called Iraq, in which there are many other towns and villages. But as Taurus is the most noble, I will tell you about it. The men of Taurus get their living by trade and handicrafts, for they weave many kinds of beautiful and valuable stuffs of silk and gold. The city has such a good position that merchandise is brought thither from India, Balazs, Cremasor, and many other regions, and that attracts many Latin merchants, especially Genoese, to buy goods and transact other business there, the more as it is also a great market for precious stones. It is a city, in fact, where merchants make large profits. The people of the place are themselves poor creatures, and are a great medley of different classes. There are Armenians, Nestorians, Jacobites, Georgians, Persians, and finally the natives of the city themselves, who are worshippers of Mohammed. They are known as Taurizi. The city is all girt round with charming gardens, full of many varieties of large and excellent fruits. Now we will quit Taurus and speak of the great country of Persia. From Taurus to Persia is a journey of 12 days. Chapter 12 of the monastery of Saint Barsamo on the borders of Taurus. On the borders of the territory of Taurus, there is a monastery called after Saint Barsamo, a most devout saint. There is an abbot with many monks who wear a habit like that of the Carmelites, and these, to avoid idleness, are continually knitting woolen girdles. These they place upon the altar of Saint Barsamo during the service, and when they go begging about the province, like the brethren of the Holy Spirit, they present them to their friends and to the gentlefolks, for they are excellent things to remove bodily pain. Wherefore every one is devoutly eager to possess them. Chapter 13 of the great country of Persia, with some account of the 3 kings. Persia is a great country, which was in old times very illustrious and powerful, but now the Tartars have wasted and destroyed it. In Persia is the city of Sabah, from which the 3 magi set out when they went to worship Jesus Christ. And in this city they are buried in 3 very large and beautiful monuments, side by side, and above them there is a square building carefully kept. The bodies are still entire, with the hair and beard remaining. One of these was called Jasper, the second Melchior, and the third Balthazar. Messer Marco Polo asked a great many questions of the people of that city as to those 3 magi, but never one could he find that knew aught of the matter, except that these were 3 kings who were buried there in days of old. However, at a place 3 days' journey distant, he heard of what I am going to tell you. He found a village there which goes by the name of Kala Ataperistan, which is as much as to say the castle of the fire worshippers. And the name is rightly applied, for the people there do worship fire, and I will tell you why. They relate that in old times 3 kings of that country went away to worship a prophet that was born, and they carried with them 3 manner of offerings, gold and frankincense and myrrh, in order to ascertain whether that prophet were God, or an earthly king, or a physician. For, said they, if he take the gold, then he is an earthly king. If he take the incense, he is God. And if he take the myrrh, he is a physician. So it came to pass, when they had come to the place where the child was born, the youngest of the 3 kings went in first, and found the child apparently just of his own age. So he went forth again, marveling greatly. The middle one entered next, and like the first, he found the child seemingly of his own age. So he also went forth again and marveled greatly. Lastly, the eldest went in, and as it had befallen the other 2, so it befell him, and he went forth very pensive. And when the 3 had rejoined one another, each told what he had seen, and then they all marveled the more. So they agreed to go in all 3 together, and on so doing they beheld the child with the appearance of its actual age, to wit, some 13 days. Then they adored and presented their gold and incense and myrrh, and the child took all the 3 offerings, and then gave them a small closed box. Whereupon the kings departed to return into their own land. Chapter 14. What befell when the 3 kings returned to their own country. And when they had ridden many days, they said they would see what the child had given them. So they opened the little box, and inside it they found a stone. On seeing this, they began to wonder what this might be that the child had given them, and what was the import thereof. Now the signification was this: when they presented their offerings, the child had accepted all 3, and when they saw that they had said within themselves that he was the true God, and the true King, and the true Physician, and what the gift of the stone implied was that this faith which had begun in them should abide firm as a rock. For he well knew what he was in their thoughts. Howbeit, they had no understanding at all of this signification of the gift of the stone. So they cast it into a well. Then straightway a fire from heaven descended into that well wherein the stone had been cast. And when the 3 kings beheld this marvel, they were sore amazed, and it greatly repented them that they had cast away the stone. For well they then perceived that it had a great and holy meaning. So they took of that fire and carried it into their own country, and placed it in a rich and beautiful church. And there the people kept it continually burning, and worship it as a god, and all the sacrifices they offer are kindled with that fire. And if ever the fire becomes extinct, they go to other cities round about where the same faith is held, and obtain of that fire from them, and carry it to the church. And this is the reason why the people of this country worship fire. They will often go 10 days' journey to get of that fire. Such then was the story told by the people of that castle to Messer Marco Polo. They declared to him for a truth that such was their history, and that one of the three kings was of the city called Sabah, and the second of Ava, and the third of that very castle where they still worship fire, with the people of all the country round about. Having related this story, I will now tell you of the different provinces of Persia and their peculiarities. Chapter 15. Of the 8 kingdoms of Persia and how they are named. Now you must know that Persia is a very great country and contains 8 kingdoms. I will tell you the names of them all. The first kingdom is that of the beginning of Persia, and it is called Kazvin. The second is further to the south and is called Kurdistan. The third is Lor. The fourth, Swolistan. The fifth is Tanit. The sixth, Sarazi. The seventh, Sankara. The eighth, Tunakan, which is at the further extremity of Persia. All these kingdoms lie to a southerly direction except one, to wit, Tunakan. That lies towards the east and borders on the country of the Arbrasol. In this country of Persia there is a great supply of fine horses, and people take them to India for sale, for they are horses of great price, a single one being worth as much of their money as is equal to 200 livres tournois. Some will be more, some less, according to the quality. Here also are the finest asses in the world, one of them being worth full 30 marks of silver, for they are very large and fast, and acquire a capital amble. Dealers carry their horses to Kizi and Kermosa, 2 cities on the shores of the Sea of India, and there they meet with merchants who take the horses on to India for sale. In this country there are many cruel and murderous people, so that no day passes but there is some homicide among them. Were it not for the government, which is that of the Tartars of the Levant, they would do great mischief to merchants, and indeed, maugre the government, they often succeed in doing such mischief. Unless merchants be well armed, they run the risk of being murdered, or at least robbed of everything. And it sometimes happens that a whole party perishes in this way when not on their guard. The people are all Saracens, that is, followers of the law of Mohammed. In the cities there are traders and artisans who live by their labor and crafts, weaving cloths of gold and silk stuffs of sundry kinds. They have plenty of cotton produced in the country, and abundance of wheat, barley, millet, pannick, and wine, with fruits of all kinds. Someone may say, but the Saracens don't drink wine, which is prohibited by their law. The answer is that they gloss their text in this way, that if the wine be boiled, so that a part is dissipated and the rest becomes sweet, they may drink without breach of the commandment, for it is then no longer called wine, the name being changed with the change of flavor. Chapter 16. Concerning the great city of Yazdi. Yazdi also is properly in Persia. It is a good and noble city and has a great amount of trade. They weave there quantities of a certain silk tissue known as Yazdi, which merchants carry into many quarters to dispose of. The people are worshippers of Mohammed. When you leave this city to travel further, you ride for 7 days over great plains, finding harbor to receive you at 3 places only. There are many fine woods producing dates upon the way, such as one can easily ride through, and in them there is great sport to be had in hunting and hawking, there being partridges and quails and abundance of other game, so that the merchants who pass that way have plenty of diversion. There are also wild asses, handsome creatures. At the end of those 7 marches over the plain, you come to a fine kingdom which is called Kerman. Chapter 17. Concerning the Kingdom of Kerman. Kerman is a kingdom which is also properly in Persia, and formerly it had a hereditary prince. Since the Tartars conquered the country, the rule is no longer hereditary, but the Tartar sends to administer whatever lord he pleases. In this kingdom are produced the stones called turquoises in great abundance. They are found in the mountains where they are extracted from the rocks. There are also plenty of veins of steel and endenique. The people are very skillful in making harness of war. Their saddles, bridles, spurs, swords, bows, quivers, and arms of every kind are very well made indeed, according to the fashion of those parts. The ladies of the country and their daughters also produce exquisite needlework in the embroidery of silk stuffs in different colors, with figures of beasts and birds, trees and flowers, and a variety of other patterns. They work hangings for the use of noblemen so deftly that they are marvels to see, as well as cushions, pillows, quilts, and all sorts of things. In the mountains of Kerman are found the best falcons in the world. They are inferior in size to the peregrine, red on the breast, under the neck, and between the thighs. Their flight so swift that no bird can escape them. On quitting the city, you ride on for 7 days, always finding towns, villages, and handsome dwelling houses, so that it is very pleasant traveling, and there is also excellent sport to be had by the way in hunting and hawking. When you have ridden those 7 days over a plain country, you come to a great mountain, and when you have got to the top of the pass, you find a great descent which occupies some 2 days to go down. All along you find a variety and abundance of fruits. In former days there were plenty of inhabited places on the road, but now there are none, and you meet with only a few people looking after their cattle at pasture. From the city of Kerman to this descent, the cold in winter is so great that you can scarcely abide it, even with a great quantity of clothing. Chapter 18. Of the city of Kamadi and its ruins, also touching the Karauna robbers. After you have ridden downhill those 2 days, you find yourself in a vast plain, and at the beginning thereof there is a city called Kamadi, which formerly was a great and noble place, but now is of little consequence, for the Tartars in their incursions have several times ravaged it. The plain whereof I speak is a very hot region, and the province that we now enter is called Reobarlis. The fruits of the country are dates, pistachios, and apples of paradise, with others of the like not found in our cold climate. There are vast numbers of turtle doves attracted by the abundance of fruits, but the Saracens never take them, for they hold them in abomination. And on this plain there is a kind of bird called francolin, but different from the francolin of other countries, for their color is a mixture of black and white, and the feet and beak are vermilion color. The beasts also are peculiar, and first I will tell you of their oxen. These are very large, and all over white as snow. The hair is very short and smooth, which is owing to the heat of the country. The horns are short and thick, not sharp in the point, and between the shoulders they have a round hump some 2 palms high. There are no handsomer creatures in the world. And when they have to be loaded, they kneel like the camel. Once the load is adjusted, they rise. Their load is a heavy one, for they are very strong animals. Then there are sheep here as big as asses, and their tails are so large and fat that one tail shall weigh some 30 pounds. They are fine, fat beasts, and afford capital mutton. In this plain there are a number of villages and towns which have lofty walls of mud, made as a defense against the banditti, who are very numerous and are called Karaunas. This name is given them because they are the sons of Indian mothers by Tartar fathers. And you must know that when these Karaunas wish to make a plundering incursion, they have certain devilish enchantments, whereby they do bring darkness over the face of day, insomuch that you can scarcely discern your comrade riding beside you. And this darkness they will cause to extend over a space of 7 days' journey. They know the country thoroughly and ride abreast, keeping near one another, sometimes to the number of 10,000, at other times more or fewer. In this way they extend across the whole plain that they are going to harry, and catch every living thing that is found outside the towns and villages. Man, woman, or beast, nothing can escape them. The old men whom they take in this way they butcher. The young men and the women they sell for slaves in other countries. Thus the whole land is ruined and is become well nigh a desert. The king of these scoundrels is called Nogadar. This Nogadar had gone to the court of Chagatai, who was own brother to the great Khan, with some 10,000 horsemen of his, and abode with him, for Chagatai was his uncle. And whilst there, this Nogadar devised a most audacious enterprise, and I will tell you what it was. He left his uncle, who was then in Greater Armenia, and fled with a great body of horsemen, cruel, unscrupulous fellows, first through Badashan, and then through another province called Pashadir, and then through another called Ariora Keshimur. There he lost a great number of his people and of his horses, for the roads were very narrow and perilous. And when he had conquered all those provinces, he entered India at the extremity of a province called Dalavar. He established himself in that city and government, which he took from the king of the country, Asadin Soldan by name, a man of great power and wealth. And there abideth Nogadar with his army, afraid of nobody, and waging war with all the Tartars in his neighborhood. Now that I have told you of those scoundrels and their history, I must add the fact that Messer Marco himself was all but caught by their bands, in such a darkness as that I have told you of. But as it pleased God, he got off and threw himself into a village that was hard by, called Konosami. Howbeit he lost his whole company except 7 persons who escaped along with him. The rest were caught, and some of them sold, some put to death. Translator's note: the magical darkness which Marco ascribes to the evil arts of the Karanis is explained by Konikoff from the phenomenon of dry fog which he has often experienced in Khorasan, combined with the dust storm with which we are familiar in Upper India. In Sind, these phenomena often produce a great degree of darkness. During a battle fought between the armies of Sind and Kach in 1762, such a fog came on, obscuring the light of day for some 6 hours, during which the armies were intermixed with one another and fighting desperately. When the darkness dispersed, they separated, and the consternation of both parties was so great at the events of the day that both made a precipitate retreat. In 1844, this battle was still spoken of with wonder. And with that, I think we'll end this evening's reading from the Travels of Marco Polo. The edition I'm reading from has pages upon pages of notes, which are fairly interesting, but definitely break up the narrative. If you'd like to read this work and those many notes yourself, as always, you'll find a link to a free ebook from Project Gutenberg in the show description. If you'd like to connect, suggest a boring book you'd like to hear read, or request more of a book we've already started, the best place to catch me is on Twitter at BoringBooksPod, or drop me an email via our website, www.boringbookspod.com. I always love hearing from you. Thank you so much for joining me for this evening's reading. Until our next boring book, good night.